the recognition that we owe ourselves, the recognition that we allow ourselves to present self, the recognition that we allow ourselves into the room self, right? Sometimes requires so much for us to do in our seasons. The room that sometimes requires us to present what others want to transform us into, right? The room that sometimes requires us to be the Rabbi Elise, that somewhat get a little bit nude about ourselves in our seasons, to be the person that sometimes expose yourself in so many that allows you to get to know yourself in your room. And I remember growing up those years at Wostenberg Lodge, how I felt with having to wear my bathing suit to the beach, how often I felt humiliated by a little dark mark on my skin, by a little stretch mark that was a little bit out for me those years. And I remember preparing my body years and years on the day that I really want to enjoy that. That is my two-piece on the beach, right? That is exactly how I want to get to know me, Rabbi, in my season. And I remember traveling to New Zealand, and I had the opportunity to learn that my body was actually what I've accepted over the years, what I have not brought my attention to a lot, what I have not allowed myself a lot to function on. But I was then introduced to my lifestyle choices, to the types of foods that were fine for me, and to accepting everything that was nurturing to me in my season. And that's sometimes how we as people get to know ourselves in our seasons, when we give ourselves recognition with where we are required to be at. We are quickly going to take a sit down because we really want to be in the comfortablest of modes with the journey that we are introducing with self, right? And while we are enjoying the hotness of the season, while we are enjoying every essence of us in our seasons, while we are enjoying every essence that we are required to present ourselves in our seasons, we are therefore designing everything use seasons, right? And with a Vogue fashion, I know that I've educated our audience somewhat a little bit of everything about Revere Elise, my fashion opinion, my own fashion cupboard, how I design my fashion cupboard. And I remember going to, while I was working at Wostenberg Lodge many years ago, how I then had the opportunity to go to Mr. Price store, and I would exactly pick my own wardrobe, and the Mr. Price employees would get excited because I then designed everything that would require me my season, right? And I then learned somewhat from the excitement that there was something about Revere Elise that I didn't give myself opportunity to get familiar with, right? And I remember on a Monday I would get paid, and on a Monday I would go to the Mr. Price store, and I would go and pick the different designs for me, Revere Elise. And how excited when I got to the till, to the cashier, and I had to pay, how excited the cashiers were, and how they were calling one another to come and check what items Revere Elise has bought on this Monday, right? And with the excitement, you get to know a little bit about yourself. It is not that we learn, educate ourselves to get recognition from other people, but we listen to, what do I say about myself, right? Someone else gives a reaction, you listen to, how do they feel about what I say about myself? And it becomes exactly that we present on our every journey. We're presenting seasons. It becomes exactly that seasons allow us to be introduced to ourselves in our seasons, to the different responses that we are required to respond to in our seasons. The seasons requires us to present the right you in your season, the you that allows yourself into that season that you have designed for yourself. And so many times other people want you to add up to where they require Rabia Elise to be in their seasons, but sometimes we have to be the Rabia Elise that are direct about it, that owns our seasons, and that says, this is how I present self in my season. And therefore, we're not harsh with ourselves. We're not arrogant about ourselves. We're not arrogant with where we are required to be at with self, but we present self with everything seasons, right? We present self with owning everything you in your season, right? The ugly you, the pretty educating about that is the welcome to you in your every season. And with our second stage of the Self Edition 1 video, we give recognition to our right us in our seasons, right? With the stage of Edition 1 video, we give recognition to what is the right you that you are required to present in your seasons. What is right from wrong when everything in this world are required you in your season, right? We have educated in 2023 have opportunity choice, right? Your right from wrong choice, allowing yourself into your birth, the womb, that you're required to present yourself. We live in a world with so many houses, so many people want to be Rabia Elise's about business. They get familiar with the about journey and they want to grab the word and they want to run with it. And Rabia Elise has to educate our season of a woman that everything on Rabia Elise means Rabia presents her work in her seasons. And therefore, no matter how challenging the season sometimes might be, no matter what the season sometimes might require of you, it is how you decide to allow your right you into your season. It is that you give your self-recognition of everything you, right? And that everything new about you is your everything you seasons. How you respond to yourself, how you decide to nurture yourself, how do you decide to take care of yourself. What are your seasons of choices when you find yourself in your community of friends, in business, in employment, in your church lifestyles, in your non-religious lifestyles, but your everything you becomes that. That is how do you design the environment that is the blossoming spring season for you amongst your seasons. And that is where we are at with this stage of the video. We're going to take a walk through with our edition 1 video, with explaining a little bit more of our South 2024 presentation, what will be in this. And with allowing ourselves into the different seasons that we sometimes are exposed to, we allow ourselves into that is your response of you in the different seasons, right? Your response of you were representing yourself in your different seasons, right? It is when our seasons require so much of us, right? When our seasons require so much of us to do, when our seasons requires us to present ourselves to a journey of seasons, then we are required to give recognition to self in our seasons, right? How we give recognition to self and most of the times where we find ourselves at in the next season. How we decide to allow ourselves into all our seasons is most of the times how we are required to respond to everything seasons, right? Everything that we present in our seasons, everything that we are required to present in our seasons, and everything that are you presenting in your seasons, right? How many people have allowed themselves into the room when they have presented and introduced themselves to someone else, right? I have mentioned in our podcast of self that when you get into the interview room, and the interviewer require of you to explain yourself, right? And the interviewer give you a little bit of a 10 seconds, and you need to explain the person that you would present in the role that you are required to be employed at, right? And I remember how many times it gives you opportunity to listen to self in your season. How many times the interviewer's question gives you an opportunity to get to know self in your season, right? So I did recruitment for somewhat 10 years, right? And I remember finding myself through the recruitment journey because every person that I now have to recruit is now going to be somewhat a little bit more advanced than Rabia Elise are in their careers. They somewhat look a bit lighter skin color. They somewhat are a bit more presentable than the interviewer Rabia Elise. And then becomes that we allow ourselves into the room while others are into the room, right? So oftentimes with introducing self, we sometimes overgive a lot of ourselves into the interview room, and then we get in the daily job, and then we really realize what is only required of you when you get into your daily job, right? And because of my 10 years in recruitment and in human resources, I have given myself somewhat opportunity to get to understand what does my career human resources require of me in the office, of me repeatedly in the office, right? So it's one thing for office managers to invite you into the room for an interview and they exactly know what they require in the room. It's another thing for office managers to invite the Rabia Elise type of person into the interview room. The Rabia Elise type of person would now present somewhat different than the normal office manager in the office, right? There's a different requirement for the Rabia Elise type of personality in the office. There's a different response that Rabia Elise has to give in the office, and there's a different requirement that the organization now has to abide to, and that is now Rabia Elise owning her human resources seat in any business, right? So most of the times when we are employed in businesses, then we want the business owners to accept us in our careers, to accept where we are at, right? And we somewhat get so much lesser than ourselves rather than allowing ourselves into that room that is you employed in your role, you employed in your career, you understanding why you were recruited and employed into the hand position of human resources, right? Into that function of our career journey on earth gives me the function human resources gives me somewhat an opportunity to once again accept myself, to once again give myself the right me in my season, and to once again get a little bit more out of allowing myself the right me into my season. We're just gonna take another journey through before we conclude with this part of edition 1 video, and because we want to present a little bit more on our self edition on the journey of self that we would be sharing with everyone. So allow yourself in the selfie moment, allow yourself into the room, Rabia Elise, allow yourself to listen to where we find ourselves at in our seasons. And with allowing everything you in your season, right? We had the opportunity to listen so much to ourselves that we cannot not allow ourselves into the room. I know I've mentioned a lot in 2022. I do not negotiate myself in my season, right? And we want to again give essence to our fashion style today. And what all that we have presented in our season, and what all that our season echoes about, with all that we are required to respond to in our seasons. We have to tell ourselves that you cannot not allow yourself, point number one, into your season. Yourself sometimes becomes that you have to allow yourself to give yourself recognition to yourself. You have to allow yourself to give yourself recognition to owning yourself in your season. And today we are sharing my birthmark leg, right? So on this leg, I've got my birthmark just behind this leg. And I always say my photo post that I find for how do I present my birth womb in my season? How do I respond with my right to represent myself, right? So many times in life we are required to silence out So many times in life we are required to sit down and not say anything. So many times in life we are required to give our birth womb up for someone else's presentation in season. But when we look into the fashion industry, we learn that everyone's pose is that pose Rabia Elise, that everyone wears the same color dress Rabia Elise, that everyone wears the same hairstyle Rabia Elise, that everyone says what a Vogue says. And in the season where everyone wants to educate themselves, that everyone says it, everyone wears it, everyone gives that pose, but everyone doesn't earn the financial support they are required to in season. And that they reveal at least educate a generation of women that recognition are due me in my season. Recognition are due me presenting myself in my season. Recognition are due how I decide to present myself in my season. I've got my birthmark on my right leg. I've got my birthmark in my inner arm and my left arm. And the right from wrong choice of that becomes that is, how do I present my birth womb? How do I represent my birth womb with the right from wrong this season? How do I decide to own up to my opportunity of choice that becomes everything you in your season? And when you allow yourself to listen to what else your birth response requires of you to do in your season, you allow yourself to listen to the everything you in your seasons. And that is where we are at with the start of the video. While we're gonna move on with our edition 1 video, our edition 1 recording, and we're gonna really prepare the recordings in a video that we're gonna make available on our YouTube page and on our Instagram page, where we're gonna add all the videos together. That is the edition 1 presentation of Salve with me, Rabia Elise. So, presenting everything you become somewhat not the much that you can say about yourself. Presenting everything you become somewhat not the much that everyone else requires you to say about yourself. But presenting everything you becomes the much time that you allow yourself to say what you say about yourself. It is the right you that are presented with how you respond to self, the right you that are presented with how you decide to react about you, the right you that are presented when you are required to be responsive about you, the right to the educate you responsibility, the 4 R's that is presented with the 4-0 journey, the 40th birthday season that I find myself in, that becomes the right you in every presentation required you in your seasons, right? The right to you that when I am reminded of my birth womb, when I'm reminded of presenting myself in my womb, when I'm reminded of representing everything Rabia Elise about the name in my womb, I am required to allow myself to listen to the 4 R's about me, right? My right to respond in my season, my right to be responsible in my season, my right to react about myself in my season, and my right to have a responsive reaction about myself in my season. My right to respond requires me to learn that in your womb everything blossoms, right? When you respond, you are alive about your requirement to respond. When you respond, when accepting yourself, you become more alive and you give birth to everything new about you when you are required to respond in your season, right? My right, you that are required to react about myself is the right me that are required to know that when someone else wants to react about business, then Rabia Elise echoes what's saying, I have the right to present myself. I have the right to therefore represent my own season. I have the right to therefore own up to everything my seasons, right? The right to be responsive in my seasons requires me to know that a responsive person are responding without responding. The recognition that your birth womb gives you to continuously give birth to everything responsive in your seasons, right? Everything that responds and that echoes about your presence in your seasons. And therefore, my right that educates me to be responsible in the 40s, the 40 R's about Rabia Elisa's name. The right to respond in my own season, the right to be responsive in my own season, the right to react upon myself and about any other reaction about me, and my right to therefore be responsible when I react about myself. Before we're gonna conclude with edition one video and with where we are sharing upon the yard experience, the gloominess of our seasons and our requirements in seasons, let's stay on that. That is our right us that are required to respond in our seasons. We're just gonna quickly shift our camera to the angle that we quickly want to share on with everyone. With our right to be responsive in our seasons, a responsive, a responsibility educates you to respond before you respond to yourself. And when we learn that as human beings we have a requirement to respond before we respond to ourselves, we learn to be attentive to how we would respond to other people and how we would find ourselves find in the opportunity of choice that we are required to make. Our responsive reaction would therefore be that opportunity that we are granted when we have to make a decision that is a right from wrong decision that is everything us in our seasons, right? When we have the responsibility that we own up to, we learn to respond to everything that echoes you in your season, to everything that echoes your name in your season. You learn to respond to everything that echoes your birth womb, that echoes your right to represent yourself, that echoes how do you present yourself and represent yourself, that echoes everything you in your season. Echoing meaning the birthness of everything you, that every season you are required to give birth. With every birth year that you celebrate, you are required to give birth to something new. And the more we learn to give birth to our something new, the more we learn to adapt to the everything new in our seasons, right? The everything new that sometimes has us questioning so much about ourselves in our seasons that we sometimes want to add up to other people's seasons, right? But the everything you responsiveness is that you react with allowing yourself into your season that we have to react at, right? And when you allow yourself to react in the season that you are required to react at, you allow yourself into the room that are birthing everything new, everything new about your seasons. That is it. We're going to conclude this part of the video before we do the completion part of the video. And we're going to share that and our addition one, that is self. Let us allow ourselves everything us in our seasons, how we present ourselves in our seasons, how we decide to represent ourselves in our seasons, how we decide to own up to our seasons, how we decide to own up to our responsibility that we are required to abide to in our every season of presenting ourselves, right? Because it is one thing for Rabia Elise to educate the generation of women how to respond to themselves in season, but it's another thing for a generation of women to listen to Rabia Elise, to listen to self in season, and to exactly respond with that. That is everything new about themselves. And that is where we are at with the right you in season, and we're presenting and representing the right you and everything you in the birthness of seasons. Let us allow ourselves to conclude the video with the birth womb Anna, right? The birth womb Anna is my Mama Anna Philander's name, right? My Mama Anna Philander grew up in Africa, and see then the mother grew up in Africa and her grandmother, and they then moved to South Africa, right? And in South Africa, we grew up from the family of our papa's families and with our Mama Anna Philander's families, and with the journey that my Mama Anna Philander took in the years 1969 with the Toba Saharan earthquake, the stories that I heard, the educations and journey, my mama that gave birth to 7 children educated me to respond to everything Rabia Elise about my seasons, right? Everything Rabia Elise in my seasons. And therefore, we're allowing yourself into listening to our journey. Allow yourself to listen to yourself while you listen to Rabia Elise's education of Self 2024. So one of the most amazing advantages that we can give ourselves with everything that we do is when we allow ourselves to listen to self, when we allow ourselves the right selves, when we allow ourselves into the room that we are required to present self. That for Rabia Elise, this season is the room, the 4-0 life journey, and allowing myself into that becomes everything blossoming in my self season. That is it for that part of the video, everyone. Have an amazing Self 2024 edition 1 with Rabia Elise.